Hello, my name is Louise Whittaker, and I'm a volunteer with the Battlefields Trust, a UK charity dedicated to preserving, interpreting and promoting British battlefields. I'd like to talk about the Battle of Boroughbridge, fought on March the 16th, 1322, when a rebel army led by Thomas, Earl of Lancaster, pursued by one royal army, tried to defeat a second one and flee to Lancaster's castle at Dunstanburgh on the Northumberland coast. Who were the main protagonists? The English king at the time was Edward II, not present at the battle in person, but under whose authority the royal army fought. Tall, strong, and apparently pretty handsome, he looked every inch a king. Edward's enjoyment in talking to ordinary people and enjoying ordinary pursuits might have made him a very successful 21st century monarch, but he was temperamentally unsuited to be a medieval ruler and unlucky to be one, having had three older brothers who all died young. His political and emotional reliance on royal favourites, to the exclusion of all others, continually undermined his kingship. Edward's representative at the Battle of Boroughbridge was Sir Andrew Harker, Warden of Wales and the West Marches, a veteran of the Scottish Wars of Independence and the only person to have enjoyed victory over the Scots since the beginning of Edward II's reign, when he successfully defended Carlisle against a Scottish attack, as depicted here with him spearing an enemy. Harker had been captured by the Scots in 1315 or 1316, but the king paid his ransom, one of Edward's more successful actions, as we shall see. The leader of the rebels was the king's first cousin and classic overmighty subject, Thomas of Lancaster. Lancaster owned 5 earldoms, with estates which gave him a large power block in Lancashire, Yorkshire and the North Midlands, and he was a man determined to limit the powers of the king through a series of ordinances, which included the banishment of the king's favourites, something which Edward continually fought against. Lancaster and Edward had been friends in their youth, and continued to be so after Edward's coronation, but only a year later they quarrelled and Lancaster left court, possibly because his expectations that his royal birth and power would make him the king's right-hand man, following the exile of Piers Gaveston, were thwarted. Edward's only thoughts were for Piers, and he soon recalled him. Piers Gaveston invented nicknames for several of Edward's nobles, and he called Lancaster the Fiddler. I don't think it was because he played a musical instrument. Gaveston's illegal execution in 1312 at the hands of the Earls of Warwick and Lancaster, on Lancaster's land, turned the Earl and Edward into deadly enemies, and any reconciliation between them was only ever going to be skin deep. Lancaster had his own opportunity to wield power after the disastrous defeat of Edward's army at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, when he headed a royal council which effectively ruled in the king's name. But his sense of self-importance and ambition outstripped his ability, and he wasn't able to rule the country any more effectively than Edward. This didn't prevent him allowing his followers to jeer at the king when the royal party passed his main stronghold of Pontefract Castle, which sounds very Monty Pythonish but was a real insult to the king, who was already looking for revenge. The immediate prelude to the battle at Boroughbridge was a rebellion in the Welsh border area caused by the rise of 2 new royal favourites, the Hugh Despensers father and son, and generous royal grants of lands to them, which, as with Gaveston, made some of the nobility feel threatened. Humphrey de Bohun, the Earl of Hereford, who was Edward II's brother-in-law at this time, and Roger Mortimer, Earl of March, were amongst those who entered into a rebel alliance with the Earl of Lancaster. However, in an uncharacteristically astute move, militarily, for him, Edward II attacked the rebels in the Welsh marches and forced the surrender of the Mortimers, before turning his attention to the rebel forces led by Lancaster and Hereford, who he took to calling the Contrariants. Lancaster had not taken part in the rebellion in the marches. His gesture of solidarity was to besiege the royal castle at Tickhill near Doncaster, unsuccessfully and in itself a treasonable act. He was slow to march south, and the Mortimers had already been captured before he arrived at Burton-on-Trent. He intended to fight the royal army there, but after a clash of arms to try and prevent Edward's army from crossing the River Trent, Lancaster realised he was heavily outnumbered and fled northwards, pursued by a detachment of the Royal Army led by the Earls of Surrey and Kent. He originally planned to hold out at his main stronghold at Pontefract, but then either decided or was persuaded to take some sea air at Dunstanburgh instead, presumably because it was close to the Scottish border to either request help or flee. Lancaster had been accused of being in league with the Scots in the past. Robert the Bruce was under no illusions about the Earl's nature, and said, "How will a man who cannot keep faith with his own lord keep faith with me?" But if Lancaster could be used as a troublemaker who diverted Edward's thoughts from Scotland, or forced him to make peace on Scottish terms, he was probably prepared to assist him. Unbeknown to Lancaster, Edward had ordered another royal army to be raised in the north, under the command of Sir Andrew Harker. Harker's orders were to march south to join the king, presumably looking out for the rebel army en route, and on arriving at Ripon, either his scouts or a spy informed him that the rebel army were due to reach Barrow Bridge, 8 miles away, on the next day. Harker therefore decided to march through the night and block the way north at the bridge and ford at Barrow Bridge, as shown on this map. Lancaster's scouts seem to have been pretty poor in comparison, and the rebel army was actually quartering in Barrow Bridge before they realised their way north was blocked. Lancaster tried to come to terms with Andrew Harker, who appears to have been a retainer of his at some point, maybe hoping to recruit him to join the rebels, but to no avail. An angry Lancaster told Andrew Harker that he would be hanged, drawn and quartered within the year, and the two armies prepared for battle. What are we looking at in terms of the size and capability of these armies? Lancaster had a force of around 700 knights and men-at-arms with their followers, and his army's strength is estimated at around 3,000, less than Andrew Harker's 4,000 men, which included archers and spearmen, or pikemen. Although the rebel army was smaller, their superior strength in mounted knights and men-at-arms may well have given them the advantage in open countryside, but trying to cross a river was a different matter. At the north side of the bridge, to the left of this picture, Harker deployed his knights on foot, together with men-at-arms and spearmen, and he also sent both archers and spearmen down to the ford, as he guessed, correctly, that this was where Lancaster would try to cross on horseback with the majority of his knights. Against the royal army, also on foot as the bridge was too narrow for a mounted attack, were the rebel knights and men-at-arms under the command of the Earl of Hereford. The medieval bridge is believed to have been in much the same place as this present one, but it was wooden rather than stone, probably with wooden slats across the bottom, and it's where the first part of the battle took place. Hereford, together with his standard-bearer and a number of knights, including Sir Roger de Clifford from Skipton, tried to force their way across. There are several near-contemporary accounts of this battle, the most detailed appearing in the Brute Chronicle. According to the Brute account, a royalist soldier got to the bottom of the problem of the Earl of Hereford. As the noble lord stood and fought upon the bridge, a thief, a worthless creature, skulked under the bridge, and fiercely with a spear smote the noble knight into the fundament, so that his bowels came out there. So whether Hereford's rearguard failed to protect him at this crucial moment, or whether he was killed in more conventional fashion, it's turned into a real annus horribilis for him. He's dead, Roger de Clifford is badly wounded by pike and arrow, and the rebels are defeated on the bridge. There's some speculation as to the whereabouts of the ford. Sadly, no contemporary account specifies how close to the bridge it was. At present, it's generally believed to be east of the bridge at Milby Lock, shown here, from where you can still see some open ground. At the ford, Thomas of Lancaster intended to force his way across with his cavalry. Knights, who would have had helmets and some plate armour to protect joints and shins, but at this period were still wearing mail hauberks or shirts, and a surcoat, as shown in this tomb effigy of the unfortunate Earl of Hereford. Andrew Harker deployed his spearmen in what's described as a schiltron after the Scottish fashion, a tight, shield-like formation, usually with pikes or spears, which the Scots armies had used very effectively against cavalry to repel attacks, and also offensively, as at Myton, only a few miles from Barrow Bridge, in 1319. The tactic was no doubt familiar to Harker's Cumbrian troops, but he also had a number of archers with longbows. The river at Barrow Bridge today is approximately 40 metres wide and was probably not much wider in the 14th century. Lancaster tried to attack across it, but according to the chronicles was met by a narrow storm from the royalist archers and forced to retreat after only one attempt. So here, 24 years before the Battle of Crecy, we're already seeing the effectiveness of the longbow against cavalry. The Life of Edward II also says that following the death of the Earl of Hereford, the rebels' zeal for battle cooled off, which doesn't say a lot for their support for Lancaster. This was effectively the end of any attempts to break out of the town and engage with the enemy. Lancaster now sent messengers to Harker to request a truce until the following morning, when the Earl would either give battle again or surrender, and this was agreed. Harker presumably was not wanting to risk entering the town with night falling, and had no need to do so as he was still in command of the northern exits. Could the rebel army have slipped away? Well, where to? There's a second royal army somewhere behind them, and their whereabouts are now common knowledge. During the night, fresh royal troops, about 400 men, arrived under the command of Sir Simon de Ward, the High Sheriff of York, to reinforce Harker's army, and bolstered by them, Harker entered Barrow Bridge early the following morning and called on Lancaster to surrender. Lancaster had taken refuge in St James's Chapel in the town, but unfortunately for the rebel earl, claiming sanctuary didn't prevent him from being dragged out, stripped, and made to wear inferior clothes as a mark of his disgrace. With Hereford dead, and now Lancaster captured, the rebellion was at an end. Lancaster was sent as a prisoner to York by water, the other main rebel leaders going by road, and a number of them, around 22, including Roger de Clifford, were executed there. Lancaster himself was brought to the king at Pontefract, his castle having surrendered to the royal army when the garrison heard he'd been captured. There are no accounts of the total number of battle casualties. We only know the names of a few knights who died on the bridge with the Earl of Hereford. It was finally time for Edward II to be revenged on his cousin for his part in Piers Gaveston's execution and the numerous slights and rebellions since, and he ordered Lancaster to be hanged, drawn and quartered, although this was commuted to beheading. On the 22nd of March, Thomas, Earl of Lancaster, was executed and buried in the Priory Church at Pontefract, near the High Altar, where miraculous cures were later claimed to have happened. He seems to have been much more popular in death than life, and there were even some petitions made to the Pope to canonise him, but they didn't come to anything. One survival of the Earl's cult can be seen in the church of South Newington in Oxfordshire, where a wall painting of the Earl's beheading is next to a wall painting of the murder of Thomas Becket. There's a tradition around this part of the medieval period where those who resisted royal oppression were seen in the tradition of Thomas Becket. Simon de Montfort in the 13th century was apparently portrayed in a similar way after he was killed at Evesham. This is the martyrdom of Thomas à Becket, which is in the church at South Newington, next to the previous picture of the execution of Thomas, Earl of Lancaster. For his victory at Barrow Bridge, Andrew Harker was made Earl of Carlisle. However, in the autumn of 1322, he failed to come to the king's aid at the Battle of Old Byland, where, despite having to fight up Sutton Bank in 2 places, the Scottish force scored a resounding victory. And the following January, Harker signed a peace treaty with Robert the Bruce without royal permission. For what was in effect treason, he was hanged, drawn and quartered, thereby fulfilling Lancaster's prophecy. Edward II was now at the height of his powers, but, having learned nothing from the rebellions and general disaffection against him, he continued to rely on unpopular favourites, particularly the grasping Hugh Despenser the Younger, until in 1327 he was deposed by his queen, Isabella, acting with Roger Mortimer in favour of his son, who became Edward III. So that's the Battle of Boroughbridge. If you visit the town today, there is a blue plaque commemorating the battle on the bridge. You can see St James's Square, the site of the chapel where Lancaster sought sanctuary, And there's also a pleasant walk down to Milby Lock, as well as along the south side of the river near Aldborough. Here there's still some open country where Lancaster's cavalry are believed to have drawn up. The battle monument used to stand in Barrow Bridge until the mid-19th century, when it was proving to be an obstruction and moved to Aldborough. It can still be seen here today. If you want to learn more about the Battle of Boroughbridge, or a number of other British battles, why not check out the Resource Centre at the Battlefields Trust website, www.battlefieldstrust.com. Thank you for watching.